Hello, welcome back to Bioclass Bites. In this video, we are going to talk about climate change as a challenge to ethical action. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. In the previous video, we talked about the scientific consensus on the causes of and solutions to climate change. We ended with this question: what is taking us so long to solve this crisis of climate change? This whole playlist is entitled Going Green Today, The Ethics of Climate Change. So in the first two videos, in the first two lessons, now we talked about observable effects of climate change and the scientific consensus about it. So these two served as introduction to the main lesson of this unit, which is what we will talk about in this video. So climate change as a challenge to ethical action. In the last video, we will look into possible high impact solutions to climate change. To give you a broader view on why it is taking us so long to solve this crisis, I recommend that you watch this video from Vox entitled Why Humans Are So Bad at Thinking About Climate Change. So this is a very important video. I'll provide the link in the description below. I also would like us to consider this quote by Robert E. Rubin, the co-chairman and Council of Foreign Relations and former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury. So the question was, what is the cause of inaction? So in his article, okay, in his article for the Washington Post entitled "How Ignoring Climate Change Could Sink the U.S. Economy," okay, it was written in 2014. No? So actually, you can read his piece, and I'll provide the link in the description below. So at the end of his essay, at the end of his article, he wrote there the following: we do not face a choice between protecting our environment or protecting our economy. We face a choice between protecting our economy by protecting our environment or allowing environmental havoc to create economic havoc. Okay? As you can see, there's this interplay between economy and environment. And as we go through this video, we will see the role that interplay has in terms to providing solutions and addressing the concerns of climate change. Since we will be talking about the ethics of climate change, I also recommend that you visit and read the following articles, okay? So the first one would be from the Nature Education Knowledge Project, Ethics and Global Climate Change, written by Stephen Gardiner, okay? So I'll provide the link in the description below. Another article is from David Rothman from MIT Technology Review, Climate Change, The Moral Choices. I also recommend that you check this out from Daedalus, The Ethical Dimensions of Global Environmental Issues, written by Donald A. Brown. And I also looked into the encyclical letter Laudato Si of the Holy Father Francis on care for our common home. Again, all of this links in the description below. From those sources, these are the following major ethical questions pertaining to climate change. So, global issues about climate change. So, we have a duty to protect biodiversity. The food supplies of the poor are especially at risk. Is the absence of scientific certainty about the consequences of human-induced climate change a valid excuse for not taking protective action? Is it legitimate for any nation to refuse to take action until all nations agree on least cost solutions? So these are many of those ethical questions discussed in those articles. But to narrow it down, okay, we have three major ethical challenges of climate change. The first one is carbon emissions have climatic effects regardless of their source. This is best seen in the tragedy of the commons between nations. To learn more about the tragedy of the commons, I recommend and require that you watch this video from TED-Ed entitled What is the Tragedy of the Commons? I'll provide the link in the description below. The tragedy of the commons is a concept first mentioned by the British economist William Forster Lloyd in 1833 in his pamphlets, wherein he talked about unregulated grazing in the common land of Great Britain and in Ireland. However, this concept was repopularized by the ecologist Garrett James Hardin in his essay in 1968. And you can access his essay in this source, Science, entitled The Tragedy of the Commons. I'll provide the link in the description below. So his essay was written in December 13, 1968. So Garrett James Hardin was able to use again this concept and made it possible for common people to understand what this is all about. So basically, the tragedy of the commons, it becomes tragic in the end. It becomes a tragedy at the end if the individual interest is placed above the interest of the collective, okay, when it comes to using the commons or common resources. So to visualize, for example, if this is a common grazing land or grazing area, okay, wherein farmers or people could have their animals graze. So the use of the commons is below the carrying capacity of the land. If that is the case, then all users benefit. So that's the first situation. However, if one or more users increase the use of the commons, for example, if they acquired more than what is their original number of livestock, okay, beyond the carrying capacity, the commons becomes degraded. Okay, so if the personal interest came first before the collective, okay, so it can cause the commons to become degraded. So the cost of the degradation is incurred by all users. Okay, so if the commons become degraded, okay, unless environmental costs are accounted for and addressed in land use practices, eventually the land will be unable to support the activity. Okay, so this is the tragedy at the end. So if you start off with a common resource such as this land, and all the users use it consensuously, all the users use it responsibly, and they do not put their primary interests or their personal interests above others, then all the users will benefit. But the moment one or two of the users of the common started to put their personal interests above everyone else, then it could cause the commons to be degraded. Then eventually, if it is not resorted, if nothing is done about it, eventually the commons will be lost and then everyone will suffer. Okay? All the users will suffer from the degradation of that common land. So how is this concept related to climate change? So this tragedy of the commons in this example mostly talk about farmers and their grazing land. However, in climate change, we are talking about tragedy of the commons between nations. And mostly, we are focusing on the carbon emissions of those nations. So according here to this statement, carbon emissions have climatic effects regardless of their source. So whoever emitted those carbon, everyone could feel its effects. So in this infographic from Our World in Data entitled Who Emits the Most Carbon Dioxide? So this shows us the global carbon dioxide emissions as of 2017. Okay, you can check this out. I'll provide the link in the description below. So in Asia, it emits 53% of total global emissions. Majority of those emissions come from the following countries: China and India, a little bit from Japan, from Iran, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and Indonesia. Then the rest of those Asian countries, they emit the least amount of carbon dioxide. From North America, it's mostly from USA. Okay, 15% of global emissions as of 2017 came from the US. 1.6% from Canada, 1.4% from Mexico. Then from Europe, the European Union emitted 9.8 of total global emissions as of 2017. Then 4.7 from Russia. Okay, so this shows us that the following countries or nations are the ones who emitted the most carbon dioxide: China, US, and European Union. Now, who has contributed the most to global CO2 emissions? So this refers to the cumulative carbon dioxide emissions from 1751 to 2017. So these are based on production-based emissions, which measure carbon dioxide produced domestically from fossil fuel combustion and cement. Okay, so again in North America, US, Europe, European Union, Asia, China, Japan, and India. And then those countries, the ones that are not do not have a big squares or rectangles, they emitted few amounts of carbon dioxide. Again, you can visit our World in Data to read more about this infographics. This map shows us the annual carbon dioxide emissions per country as of 2017. So the nation with the most number of carbon dioxide emissions that reached almost 10 billion tons would be China. Then between 5 to 7.5 billion tons would be Alaska, USA, Russia, India, Japan, and then less than 1 billion tons, so you have the rest of the countries. Okay? So the Philippines, we emitted, something around 250 million tons of carbon dioxide as of 2017. Again, this is still from our World in Data. This one is a map of share of global cumulative carbon dioxide emissions as of 2017. So this is the calculated sum of annual emissions from 1751 to a given year. So that's from 1751 to 2018. So the darker colored nations, they emitted up to 50% of all the shared global cumulative emissions. So that would include USA, Alaska, China, Russia. Then between 10 to 25%, you have India, Japan. Then less than 10%, you have the remainder of the countries. So the Philippines, we have a share of less than 0.5% of global cumulative carbon dioxide emissions. I'll provide the link in the description below. Now, I want to compare those maps with this map from German Watch, their Climate Risk Index 2020. So, this index shows us the countries and regions that have been affected by the impacts of weather-related loss events due to climate change. So, those events could be storms, floods, heat waves, and etc. So, as of 2018, these are the top 3 countries most affected by climate change: Japan, Philippines, and Germany. Okay? If you want to read more about this table, I'll provide the link in the description below. So this map is the ranking from 1999 to 2018. So the darker red ones, or the dark red nations, are the top 10 with the highest climate risk score. So that would be, as you can see, Philippines here, then some countries here in Southeast Asia. India is also part of that, okay? Here, some European countries as well, they have a darker color, okay? So, but as of 2018, no? So this is the Climate Risk Index ranking for 2018. So there's this change in some of those colors, in some of those nations. So as of 2018, even Canada, okay, and some parts of these islands are also already considered high risk in terms of climate risk, okay? Japan is included now, okay, not so much in the past, but Japan is included now. India, the Philippines is still part of that, and then those countries that are listed here. So let's go back, no? So this again is the share of global cumulative emissions. These are the countries who emitted the most number of carbon dioxide from 1751 to 2018. However, and then these are the countries who did not emit it did not emit much of carbon dioxide. However, okay, those countries that emitted the most are the ones who are not so much affected by climate change. And the ones who emitted the least are the ones who are mostly affected by climate change. Okay, so you can compare here this continent of Africa, okay, And then here, there are some countries who are mostly affected by climate change. The Philippines, we emitted almost just 0.5% of the global cumulative carbon dioxide emission. But we are number two in the ones which is mostly affected by climate change. Okay? There's that discrepancy. There's that um, concern, okay, about those who emit the most and the ones who get affected the most with climate change. Another area of concern would be the relationship between income and their percentage of carbon dioxide emissions by world population. So this figure is from Vox. You can visit this article. I'll provide the link in the description below. This one is the global income deciles, okay, and associated lifestyle consumption emissions. So this shows us the world population arranged by income, by percentage, by 10%, and then the percentage of their carbon dioxide emissions. As you can see, the richest 10% of the world population are the ones who emitted the most, with a total of 49% of carbon dioxide emission. The richest 10% is responsible for almost half of total lifestyle consumption emissions. So just to finance their rich lifestyle, they are the ones who emitted the most. And then you have here your middle income segment of the population, while the poorest 50%, the poorest 50%, the ones who earn the least, okay, are only responsible for just 10% of the total lifestyle consumption emissions. So what does it tell us? The richest part of the population, the richest member of the populations are the ones who are contributing the most to the carbon dioxide emissions, while the poorest are the ones who are contributing the least carbon dioxide lifestyle emissions. Now, this one is another infographic from Our World in Data. It shows us the global carbon dioxide emissions by income and region. So this shows us the per capita carbon emissions per person per year. So the high income group, okay, that's 1.2 billion people in the world population. That's just 16% of the world population. They emitted collectively 11.3 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year. 11.3 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year. While those in the upper middle income, so that's 51% of the population, 2.6 billion people, each person only emitted 6.4 tons of carbon dioxide per year. Okay? So so since there are more people in the upper middle income bracket, no, they emit a total of 48% global emissions. But that's still few compared to the 11.3 tons per carbon per person for the high income group. Then the lower middle income group, so that's 49% of the population, they only emitted 1.6 tons per carbon dioxide per person per year. Okay, they only contributed 13% of the total global emissions. While the low income, they only emitted 0.2 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year. So they are in the low income group. So what does it tell us? Again, it supports this diagram that those with the higher income, they are the ones who emitted the most number of carbon dioxide per person per year compared to the upper middle income, lower middle income, and then those low income individuals. This one is still from Our World in Data. It shows us, again, no, by region, okay, by region of the world. So North America, they are the ones who emitted the most per person, 17.6 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year. So North America. Then you have Oceania, 11 tons per person per year. Europe, 5.6 billion tons or 16% in total. So that's 7.6 tons tons of carbon dioxide per person per year. Latin America, 4 billion. That's 6.2 tons per carbon dioxide per person per year. Then Asia, we have the least number of carbon dioxide, second to the least number, 3.8. So people in Asia, we are only emitting 3.8 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year. Compare that to those who live in North America, 17.6. So 3.8 versus 17.6. And then in Africa, 1.1, they emit the least, 1.1 pounds of carbon dioxide per person per year. Okay? They only emit that amount of carbon dioxide. So again, you can visit this in our World in Data. I'll provide the link in the description below. Now, this graph shows us the carbon dioxide emissions versus the share of people living in extreme poverty as of 2017. So here we see the per capita carbon dioxide emissions and the population living in extreme poverty. So here in United States, they are the ones who emitted the most number, 16 tons of carbon dioxide emissions, but they have very few people living in extreme poverty. Okay? It means that most of their population are well off or well adjusted. Okay? Countries such as Russia, Iceland, Mongolia, Norway, these are mostly developed countries. They have very high carbon dioxide emissions, but very few people are living in extreme poverty. While in this case, countries such as Ghana, Yemen, Cameroon, Timor, Kenya, they are the ones who are emitting very few carbon dioxide, less than 2 tons. Okay? But they have many percentage or very high percentage of their population in extreme poverty. So almost no carbon dioxide emission, but many of their people live in extreme poverty. Now, this is from Oxfam International. Again, you can visit this. I'll provide the link in the description below. It shares us the cumulative emissions from 1990 to 2015 and the use of global carbon budget for 1.5C linked to 1.5 degrees Celsius linked to the consumption of different global income groups. Okay? So, the richest 1%, okay, so that's the black one, this black part of the diagram, they have this total share of cumulative emissions. Okay, so compared with the richest population, okay, with these two, they emit 52% of the cumulative emissions between 1990 and 2015. So they are just the fewest members of the population. Imagine they're just 10%. This is the total population, and this is just the number of the richest bracket in a population. But they are the ones who emitted the most carbon dioxide. The middle income, which is 40% of the population, we emitted 41%. But there's quite many, okay, of us, 40%. We emitted 41% of the global cumulative emissions, while the poorest of us, the poorest of the people, the poorest of the nations, which is 50% of all the population, we emitted only 7% of those total cumulative emissions. So the fewest of us, the richest of us, emitted the most, and then the middle income and then the poorest of us emitted almost, if not half, the least of those carbon dioxide emissions. Okay? This one is still from Oxfam. This is the dinosaur graph of an equal carbon emissions growth from 1990 to 2015. It tells us that the richest 5% alone is responsible. So the richest 5% alone, okay, is responsible for the 35% of carbon dioxide emissions, and the richest 10% for the 46% of total emissions growth. So the richest of us are the ones who emitted the most carbon dioxide. So this is continuously supported by all this data. Okay? While the middle income, not so much, and then the poorest of us only emitted just 5% of those total carbon dioxide from 1990 to 2015. So the few richest emitted the most, majority emitted not so much, and then the poorest, the very few of us who are the poorest, emitted the lowest number of carbon dioxide. In the Paris 2015 UN Climate Change Conference, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi argued this. Okay, India's latest negotiating position is to demand that the global north, okay, so the global north, okay, so here, these countries, the global north makes steep carbon cuts so that India may continue to pollute for economic development. Okay? India would reduce the carbon intensity of its economic activity but would not make cuts for decades as its total greenhouse gas pollution grows. So of course, this position led to a great deal of bickering among the participants in the conference, not only over who should shoulder the economic and social burden, but how sustainable development should move forward. So it's quite brave, okay, for the Indian Prime Minister to say this in a conference. But for him, it's those countries, those northern countries or global north countries are the ones who should make adjustments because they are the ones who are mostly contributing to carbon dioxide emissions. And countries such as India would need to continue to pollute so that they could progress economically. Now, Hardin, in his 1968 essay, said that ruin is the destination toward which all men rush, each pursuing his own best interest in a society that believes in the freedom of the commons. So, in all of those data that I've presented to you, more or less, you will have an idea on why we are facing a lot of ethical, political, and economic concerns regarding solving climate change. The second ethical challenge to climate change is this. Current emissions have profoundly intergenerational effects. Okay? Or in other words, future negative impacts are severe and cumulative. So this is not only tragedy of the commons between nations, but tragedy of the commons between generations. So this is from Rappler. It shows us the projected emissions through the years from the following sectors: energy, agriculture, transportation, industry, and waste. Okay, so it is projected that we will continuously have an increase in our carbon dioxide emissions and expected to triple by 2050. However, our forested areas are expected to decrease as time goes by. Okay. Now, these maps and diagrams are from nature education. They say that higher levels of greenhouse gases emissions correlate with higher future global average surface temperature. Okay, so right now we are around here, let's say 2020 to 2029. But as time goes by, there will be an increase in global average surface temperature. So by 2090, there will be an increase by 6.5 or 7.5 degrees than the 2020 global average surface temperature. So this poses challenges of skewed vulnerabilities and intergenerational ethics. To minimize the harmfulness of climate change, emissions should be significantly reduced during this time so that this will not be the future. And most authors agree that this burden should fall primarily on developed countries, at least initially. This is what the Indian Prime Minister was saying, that the global north countries are the ones who should make the steep carbon cuts. Okay, now this is an intergenerational ethics problem because this is the world created by the adults right now, but this is what their children will have, the earth that their children will inherit. Okay, so there's the intergenerational conflict right there. Now, you, my students, did you know that you are called the Generation Climate? Okay. Just a quick search in the internet will bring up a lot of sources. But this one is from Mongabay News and Inspiration from Nature's Frontline. You are called the Generation Climate. If you want to read about this, I'll provide the link in the description below. So a quick search about Generation Climate, and then you will know more about that. So this is what the generation climate is described, or how you are described. You are the first full generation born into a world where climate catastrophe is already an established fact. Okay, so you are the generation that will grow up and learn that climate change is a fact in your life. You could see the world's coral reefs wiped off the face of the earth, that could see an Arctic wholly free of ice, and sea levels swallow islands and coastlines across the world. You're the generation that will spend the entirety of your adult lives in a world that is already 1 degree Celsius warmer than it should be, where carbon dioxide concentrations are outside any previous generation's experience. Your generation may see widespread famines due to agricultural failure and desertification, social and political upheaval from mass migrations, conflict and societal breakdowns caused by a destabilized climate. So this is what awaits you in the future. But none of this will be your fault. This is what I've mentioned. No? You will just be inheriting the world we have created. So that's from Jeremy Hans in the it's Generation Climate article. So none of this is your fault. This is just the world that you will inherit. So again, this is just the world you are going to inherit. So David Rothman said, how do you convince people and governments to invest in a far-off future? How do you convince the politicians right now to invest in the future, to invest in their children's future? It might be hard because it will involve defining and understanding our responsibility to future generations. Our action, or again, inaction, remember Rubin, on climate change falls squarely onto the realm of moral and political philosophy. So again, this is one of those ethical challenges of climate change. How do we convince adults right now to invest into the future of their children? Something is being done to address the climate change. So in 2015, under the leadership of United Nations Climate Change, the Paris Agreement was signed. Okay, in December 12, 2015, parties to the UNFCCC reached a landmark agreement to combat climate change. So the Paris Agreement was signed. It brought all nations into a common cause to undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change. It charts a new course in the global climate effort. Okay, if you want to read more, I'll provide the link in the description below. So how about in the Philippines? So in 2017, our president signed the Paris Pact on climate change. So the President Rodrigo Duterte has signed the Paris Agreement restricting greenhouse gas emissions, putting the deal one step closer to ratification in the country. So the agreement, which came into force, aims to transform the world's fossil fuel-driven economy within decades and to increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Um, However, it is to note that the firebrand leader had threatened that he would not honor the agreement since he believed it would hurt the country's efforts to industrialize it initially. But in November, he relented, citing a cabinet decision to support the deal. So this is from Reuters. I'll provide the link in the description below. So 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed and eventually enacted. 2017, the Philippines was able to sign it. But in 2019, okay, it was found out that the Philippines' climate measures lack urgency despite vulnerable status, as the experts say. So this is from ABS-CBN. So global think tank Climate Analytics said that the Philippines is not doing enough to adhere to the Paris Agreement. Okay, they find the Philippines has a long way to go to halt emissions growth. A clear example is the electricity sector, where there are plans to continue increasing substantially the role of coal, and we've talked about the role of coal in climate change, locking in the country into a carbon-intensive pathway for decades. Okay? So, the analytics people estimate that the massive expansion of coal-fired power plants in the Philippines would mean that the coal power generation will only peak by 2035 and be phased out by 2062. Okay, you can read this article. I'll provide the link in the description below. According to Business World, in this article, okay, you can check this out with the link below. Coal still dominates the Philippines energy mix. Okay, so this is measured by megawatt hours. Okay, so a megawatt hour is equal to 1,000 kilowatt hours. it is equal to 1,000 kilowatts of electricity continuously used for 1 hour. Okay? It is equivalent to the amount of electricity used by around 330 homes during 1 hour. So the lowest type of plant that generates electricity would be oil-based plants with just 3.7 million megawatt hours. It is followed by natural gas with 20.5 million megawatt hours, then renewable energy at 23.1 million megawatt hours. But still, the greatest um, total generated energy still comes from coal at 46.8 million megawatt hours of energy. So all in all of this amounts to 94.3 million megawatt hours of total generation. Now, to learn more, this is a video from GMA News from Born to Be Wild. Paano ginagamit ang coal sa mga power plant? You can check this out with the link in the description below. Now, this one is a GIF that shows us a coal-fired power station or coal power plant. It is a thermal power station which burns coal to generate electricity. So in the Philippines, this is mostly how energy is generated. So we burn coal. So first, we mine coal. And then we burn it to heat water. And then the steam coming from that, the evaporated steam coming from that water, will be the one to run the turbine. So those are large turbine or they look like propellers. So the mechanical energy generated from the turbine, okay, is converted into electrical energy with the magnet and the coil here. And then that electric energy will run along power lines to be distributed into houses. So as the demand for electricity increases in the individual houses, then more and more coals need to be burnt so that more water will be boiled so that the steam will run more turbine to generate more electricity. So this is how electricity is generated, most specifically here in our country. Okay? To learn more about the intergenerational effects of climate change, I recommend that you visit this page from Smithsonian, Second Opinion. So here, they talked about what we owe the future generation. So this was actually the transcript of their discussion. I'll provide the link in the description below. So this is the actual discussion video of that talk. Okay, so this was uploaded in their Smithsonian Magazine YouTube channel. It's quite a long discussion, and if you're interested, if you want, I'll provide the link in the description below. One of the panelists there was Jedediah Purdy, a professor of law at Duke University and the author of After Nature, A Politics for the Anthropocene. He said, climate change is a common tragedy across generations because each generation can, in a narrow rational sense, act in its own interest while putting the cost of dealing with the consequences of what it's done on those who come after. So this is the classic tragedy of commons across generations. David Rothman also said that even if people are richer in the future, climate change might reduce the quality of their lives and possibly the lives of their children. Now, who is responsible for climate change and who needs to fix it? So I recommend that you watch this video from Kyrgyzstan. It's a very educational video, very entertaining, and it mostly touches a lot of what we've discussed so far. So if you're interested, you can find the link in the description below. The third ethical challenge to climate change is this. Climate change raises questions about the value of non-human nature. So that mostly focus on the relationship between humans and the rest of nature. A simple Google search on endangered species due to climate change will give you a lot of information, a lot of articles, so you can do that. But we have to remember that species extinction already happened in the past. So we had a recorded of 5 mass extinctions in the past, and currently we are experiencing what they call the 6th mass extinction. However, please note that the previous mass extinctions are due to environmental changes, okay? Major cataclysmic and catastrophic changes that brought about those extinction. But for the first time ever in the history of life in our planet, we are experiencing mass extinction due to human activities or as results of human activities. And one of those results would be climate change due to greenhouse gases. So the rates of species extinction have increased dramatically as human numbers and technological power has also increased. So you can also visit this in Google News, specifically the science section. So in wildlife tab, you can see there almost every day that they would post latest news about endangered species or extinct species or poached creatures that we are currently dealing right now. So I also recommend that you visit this and make it a habit to read news from about wildlife. Now, to learn more about that sixth extinction I just mentioned, I recommend that you watch this video from It's Okay to Be Smart entitled The Sixth Extinction. I'll provide the link in the description below. Now, here again, this is a graph or a representation of the number or the percentage of organisms and creatures that are being endangered and extinct due to human activities. So here are we in the midst of a sixth mass extinction. So here 99% of known bird species have been assessed, and then 13% of those are considered threatened. Of all the mammals, 85% have been assessed, and 25% of those mammals are said to be threatened. In terms of amphibians, they have higher. 41% of all those assessed organisms, assessed amphibian species, 41% have been identified as threatened. Okay? See, because most of known species of birds, mammals, and amphibians have been evaluated, scientists are more confident about the percentage of this being threatened. In terms of other organisms, insects, 751 species are threatened. Crustaceans, 0.6, 3%. Non-flowering plants, 3% of those population are threatened. For flowering plants, 5%. 5% for mollusks, 23% for fishes, okay, several fish species, and 29% of known reptile species have been assessed to be threatened. Okay, so sometimes there are species that already went extinct, wherein we were not even able to identify or to learn about them. Okay, so in terms of extinct species, 327 species of mollusks have been extinct, 68% fishes, 39% amphibian species, 10% non-flowering plants, and others. Okay. Now, who should pay for the protection of biodiversity? Okay, so again, the third ethical problem is between human versus non-human organisms. So this article from National Geographic answered this specific question. I'll provide the link in the description below. So we see here, this one is actually a classic image of an organism being threatened by climate change, a polar bear standing on an ice floe near Manitoba, Canada. Okay, polar bears depend on sea ice, which is forming later in the fall and disappearing earlier in the spring, and more of this ice are melting due to climate change. This is from Nature Education. It says there, climate change raises serious questions about how we should relate to non-human animals and the rest of nature. So we have this view of plants and animals' value for human uses versus plants and animals having intrinsic value and should be treated as sacred. So the question on who should pay for the protection of biodiversity, we always have to remember we humans have a duty to protect biodiversity. Okay? To read more about this, you can visit that article on ethics and global climate change. I'll provide the link in the description below. According to Donald Brown in his essay, The Ethical Dimensions of Global Environmental Issues, he said that if biodiversity has a value that cannot be quantified in market transactions, it should not be treated as a commodity in a cost-benefit analysis. It means that we do not have to think on what it will cost us to protect, what it will cost us to protect biodiversity, because we cannot give a value on how on the importance of biodiversity. So I hope you know what biodiversity is. It refers to the diversity, okay, the wide array of species, plants and animals and fish and mammals of living things in a particular biome, in a particular ecosystem. So there's no value to the biodiversity because they are there to sustain the ecosystem, to sustain they're being sustained by the biome, by the ecosystem. So they should not be treated as a commodity. They should not be seen as something that has a cost benefit analysis, or we will only give this amount because this is the amount we will get from biodiversity. Okay, so that's what Donald Brown was saying in his essay. Even the Pope said in his Laudato Si um, encyclical letter, because all creatures are connected, each must be cherished with love and respect. For all of us, creatures are dependent on one another. Each area is responsible for the care of this family. Okay? And recently, His Holiness Pope Francis gave a talk to TED-Ed entitled Our Moral Imperative to Act on Climate Change and Three Steps We Can Take. Okay, this was just this October 2020. I also recommend that you watch this video, and I'll provide the link in the description below. So, after knowing all those ethical challenges of climate change, do we have high impact solutions? Can anything be done to solve this crisis? That will be the topic in our next video. I hope you learned something new in this video, so don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. Till next time, goodbye.